interesting sentence here. If you do not get disturbed by the external things that happen, then you are the person, as it says here, fit for immortality. That's an interesting thing to say, because on the one hand, they just said that the essence of every human being is immortal. And then here they say, it's when you not identify with external forms and sensory perceptions, but allow them to be, then you are fit for immortality. So one would need to add here, what Krishna is talking about is conscious immortality. To be conscious of your own immortality, which is very different from unconscious immortality. When you're not conscious of your immortality, there's great fear of death. So conscious immortality is realizing within yourself the essence of who you are beyond the form. That is conscious immortality. And you can only realize the essence of who you are beyond the form if you don't react continuously to the forms that arise around you as sensory perceptions, situations, people. They all become sensory perceptions. If you live in reactivity, I want to have that, I must get rid of, then of course you're trapped more and more in form, especially psychological form. So allowing things to be, not being dependent on externals, is part of the spiritual practice, is part of realizing yourself as formless consciousness. So this is the teaching of detachment. Without detachment, you can talk about spiritual things for 100 years and talk about God in every other sentence, and it makes no difference. There's nothing spiritual in anything you say or believe in. Without detachment, the spiritual dimension is not open, hasn't opened up. Right, Krishna continues. Real, as used in spirituality, means that which is eternal, never changing, indestructible. This is the very definition of reality. That which is real in spiritual language, spiritual terms, that which is real never ceases to be. Anything that is impermanent, even if it lasts a very long time and seems durable, eventually changes and thus does not have true reality. The wise ones understand the difference between the real and the not real. When you fully understand this profound fact, you will have attained the zenith or pinnacle of all knowledge. This needs to be qualified a little bit. He says, when you fully understand this profound fact, which is the difference between real and unreal. Now this translation here may not be the ideal one, because it's not, this gives the impression that there's intellectual understanding required for you to realize the real. So when he says, when you fully understand this profound fact, it really means when you fully realize this profound fact. And the understanding would be an intellectual work, analytical work, and just, oh, now I get it. The real doesn't change, and the unreal is whatever changes. I'm beginning to understand now. No, that's not it. So it's not understanding as such, it's realizing. So I would suggest a different translation here. When you fully realize this profound fact, you will have attained the pinnacle of all knowledge. And how do you realize that? Well, that's what it's all about, to realize that in you that's not subject to change. Well, where is that? Well, you could approach it very simply. What is it that never changes in your life? One could ask. Well, I don't know. Well, if you look closely, you see one thing never changes. Your life is always now. It's always the present moment. It has never not been the present moment, undoubtedly, nor could it ever not be the present moment. So your life is always the present moment. Not what happens in the present moment that changes, but it's always the space of the present moment. That space, that there's content in it, but in itself it is just space for the content, that is unchanging. And that is consciousness, not the content of consciousness, the space of consciousness. And so if you become acutely aware of the present moment as the very foundation of your life, or the very essence really of who you are the present moment in which everything arises and then disappears again. Forms come and go. What he talks about, the impermanence of all forms. Therefore, the forms are not ultimately real. Only that which is beyond form is real. So what arises in the present moment is not ultimately real, but that which gives rise to it is real. It's consciousness itself. One's body, then, Krishna says, is not real, not in those terms, and yet there is something that dwells within the body that is real, and it is called here the Atma, which is existence itself, says this translation. I would suggest another translation here, which is being itself. It's not existence, because existence is something that stands out, that has form. Ex means out, Latin. Sistens, standing. So he's not talking about existence, he's talking that which underlies existence, which is being. But then he suggests two other terms for it: awareness or pure consciousness, which is correct. So I'll read one more time this little part. One's body, then, is not real, and yet there is something that dwells within the body that is real, the Atma, which is being, I've changed the translation, which is being itself, awareness, pure consciousness. The wonderful thing, just a brief mention, when you are in touch with the truth within yourself, the truth of being, of who you are, and you read a spiritual text or the translation of a text or something handed down over centuries, you can immediately see what's wrong or what's right. I can see what's wrong or right in this translation without knowing Sanskrit. Because immediately you see it, oh, that's the wrong translation. Don't even need to look up what the original is, because the truth is realized within, and whether or not it's accurately shown when you see a text, you know it immediately. I'm jumping ahead now just to illustrate what I just said. In the same, still chapter 2 where we are, just a little bit further, it says this, just an illustration of what I just said to you. A reservoir that is necessary during a dry spell is of little use during a flood. Similarly, to the enlightened person, even scriptures are superfluous. Yes, live amicably with worldly existence, but know you must transcend it. Prepare yourself for nothing less than union with divinity itself. The important part here why I read it is a reservoir of water that is necessary during a dry spell is of little use during a flood. So to the enlightened person, the scriptures are superfluous. You don't need books and scriptures anymore, but you may enjoy them, and if something is not correct in them because also the mistranslation or because it's been misquoted, like some of the sayings of Jesus, when I first saw the New Testament after my shift in consciousness and read it, I could see the truth of it. And I also saw occasionally, that can't be right, that's not how it is. So how the person, the evangelist or whoever wrote it, had misinterpreted the original teaching. So it's a wonderful thing. You recognize the truth when you see it, and when it's not quite right, you immediately know it. So he talks about the reality of who you are beyond the physical form. And the next sentence here is, get to know this reality. It pervades the entire cosmos and is unchanging and indestructible. No power can affect it. No one can change the changeless. And I like that translation, get to know this reality, which is better than understand, because you can't understand it. It pervades the entire cosmos and is unchanging and indestructible. This Atma is like space or sky. Clouds appear in the sky, but their presence does not cause the sky to grow apart to make room for them. In the same manner, the Atma, the true self within, remains ever itself. Things of the material universe come and go, appear and disappear, but the Atma never changes. So I often, of course, use space also as one of the most appropriate words to point to that formless essence of all life. It is like space, what we experience as space, and you can't even experience space, but somehow it's there. The Atma, the real us, was never born, nor will it ever die. This eternal reality within is never destroyed. When your ego takes over and you erroneously identify yourself with the body, you feel that physical death is death to the self, and that is frightening. But the self, the Atma, can never be killed. When the body is slain, the Atma remains unaffected. As a person sheds a worn-out garment, the dweller within the body casts aside its time-worn human frame and dons a new one. The cessation of your present pain and sorrow will depend on how well you overcome your ignorance of your true self that lives within you. So the only way of being free of suffering, of sorrow, is to overcome the ignorance of your true self that lives within you. And then it continues to talk more again. We're still in the same chapter of the nature of the self. It's in some way repetitious, but that is how the reading of it or the listening to it can in itself become a transformational process if you listen in a state of openness and receptivity. So I'll read just another two little paragraphs. He says, nothing new now that hasn't already been said, but in slightly different words, repeats the same to drive it home, to drive it into you, where the truth can be recognized, not by the ego, but by the underlying intelligence. It is not easy to fathom this mysterious concept of the true self. Everything else in the world changes. Every creature, rock, blade of grass, human being, element or component of any kind changes. Only the Atma never changes. Because it is never modified, it is termed immutable. Because it is invisible, has no form and cannot be heard, smelled or touched, it is termed unmanifested. Because the human mind cannot perceive or conceive it, it is said to be unknowable. Unknowable means you cannot understand it. Ah yes, he actually says that. No one really understands the Atma. One person sees it as wondrous, another speaks of its glory, others say it is strange. And there are many who listen but do not comprehend it at all. Very few even think of inquiring into what is beyond this physical world. Humans who are not ready yet for this realization have no interest in even asking the question. They continue to be identified with form, believing that that is all there is and all they want and all they need. And as they continue to be identified with form, gradually their suffering grows, increases more and more, until finally something in them cracks open, a little crack appears in their otherwise impenetrable form identity, and then they begin to be open to the deeper message, they can then suddenly hear the truth of this and then want to know more, go more deeply into it. And we'll skip a few paragraphs now. In the next sentence here, there's a brief reference again to the battle, but already it's used metaphorically rather than the real battle. Heed this important point about life in general. The way to win this great war is to react alike to both pain and pleasure, profit and loss, victory and defeat. You may remember I wrote in A New Earth about the Zen master who, when accused of having done something, falsely accused, all he ever said is that so? He immediately accepted, he reacted alike to pain and pleasure, victory and defeat, just completely at one with the isness, as I sometimes call it, of the present moment. That's what it is. So the way to this realization is the inner alignment, the inner oneness with what is now. And the spiritual practice is, as I sometimes put it, saying yes to whatever arises in this moment. So, pain or pleasure, it is what it is at this moment. Profit or loss is what it is. Victory or defeat is what it is. But it also implies it's not that you become devastated when there is a defeat, you lose your job, but also means when there is a victory or gain, you don't become ecstatic.